Welcome to the Christopher Hall Training Podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the advantages of the Mcgill Method. There are other methods out there for lower back pain, but I've found to be the most effective one, the Mcgill Method. So let's talk about some of the advantages and get into it. The first and possibly most important advantage of the Mcgill Method is it subcategorizes lower back pain. So it digs a little bit deeper into what low back pain is for a specific individual. Many of other methods that are out there, they will use low back pain as a general rule. If you look at social media, it will just say beat lower back pain, low back pain rehab, whatever it may be, without any context as to what sort of type of back pain that it could be. So it just say 3 exercises for back pain, which is a very general term, which isn't terribly specific and useful to an individual that has a specific type of lower back pain. So by categorizing lower back pain into flexion intolerance, extension intolerance, compression intolerance, you start to be able to dig a little bit deeper into, well, first of all, what the back pain is and what's causing it, which then gives you a much more specific outcome as to what you need to do about it. Because if you go through a process, and how this is done, it's through a sort of questioning process. There's a degree of consultation that goes on, the asking of questions to understand the lifestyle aspects and postures, positions, movements, loads that are triggering people's problems. And then there's an assessment, so you not only get it out of them and they tell you what the problem is, but you actually take them through a process physically as well, so you can kind of repeat a process, if you will. So if they say, I get back pain while I sit down, that's giving you enough, or it's giving you some information to say that there's a flexion intolerance. But then if you then take them into a specific posture, which is similar to sitting, and it then creates that same problem, you're starting to get a better sense of what's causing the lower back pain. So it does it through a questioning process, it does it through a physical assessment process, and as I've mentioned, what you're then able to do is then start to build a much fuller, a much more effective way of dealing with that person's lower back pain. Because as I mentioned, a lot of them will just say, if you have lower back pain, do these 3 stretches. If you have lower back pain, go through this process of doing X, Y, and Z. Whereas that person hasn't really had any degree of understanding of what their lower back pain is. Because if you have an extension intolerance, which basically means extension causes or triggers your lower back pain, if you then put them in an extension posture, if you have a method that takes people through an extension posture, then it's going to be causing triggering the very problem that you're trying to solve. And just by having that method or that process for someone to go through isn't the most effective way of overcoming their lower back pain. What would be more effective is to understand that they have extension intolerance. Then essentially you remove those triggers, or at least minimize them, and then you send them onto a process of overcoming that. So you have to be able to subcategorize, and you have to be able to understand a bit more fully what the individual's type of back pain is, and then when you marry those two together, so you have the understanding that there are subcategories, you know how to find those subcategories, and then you can start building a proper solution for an individual. So it's not just going to be sort of written down in a book or in a video to say, if you have lower back pain, do X, Y, and Z, and your problem will be solved, because unless you're very lucky, it's not necessarily going to work. So the first advantage is it subcategorizes low back pain. I guess at this point it's probably a good idea to mention I'm not Mcgill Method certified. I'm not a practitioner. I have interviewed him 3 times. I've read all of his books. You could probably see some of them behind me there. I was introduced to Low Back Disorder, which is the book, the big textbook behind me there, in 2009. That was when I first got hold of the information, and I've, to the best of my ability, I've followed it ever since. So I've been following his work since 2009. As I mentioned, interviewed him 3 times. I've got all of his books and read through them. I've attended his 3-day training workshops. So the first one is understanding lower back pain, sort of what I described before about being able to categorize it, the underpinning anatomy and things like that. Day 2 is the assessment, so going through assessing and then starting to build the solution, so talking about exercises, talking about stretches, so on and so forth. And then day 3 is a more sort of fitness and performance end of it. The end of day 2 is the let's just say the more sort of health orientated spine exercises, and then the day 3 is more the fitness end of the spectrum. Read a number of his papers, and as someone that provides a face-to-face and online service, I don't just give people a walking program, because the amount of comments that I've had from people about I went to see a Mcgill practitioner or certified person, and all they gave me was a walking program. That's not something that I do. I'm not, as I mentioned, I'm not certified. I'm not affiliated with the Mcgill Method in any way, really. Only in so much as I've read the books, I've interviewed him, I've been to the training, and essentially I found it to be the most effective. It's not only the most sort of effective and specific, it's also the most broad, because it gives you a better understanding of low back pain as a whole, so you're able to use the method effectively, if that makes sense. It is a part of what I use. I don't just use the Mcgill Method. Obviously, I've been a PT. I'm not a physio either. A lot of people make that mistake. I'm a personal trainer and a sports massage therapist. So again, just through reading his work and using his information, I've been able to include that into other aspects, because I do use a lot of work from functional movement systems as well, and I've sort of combining the two. So my assessment is a bit more expansive than the Mcgill Method. There's more in it than what Stuart McGill suggests. So yes, that's just a little bit about me and sort of what I do and use the Mcgill Method. As I mentioned, I'm not affiliated with him. I've just found it to be the most effective method. The second advantage is it uses practical everyday ways of reducing pain. A lot of people whether they get confused or whether they just misunderstand, I'm not sure. But they use exercise and stretches to try and help reduce people's lower back pain, which has its place. But as I'll explain in the next section, it kind of gets taken out of context a little bit. So what I mean by practical everyday ways or solutions to reduce lower back pain, if we go back to the example that I used in the first part, which was the flexion intolerance and the pains triggered by sitting, it sort of opened the doorway to sort of say to people that, well, obviously sitting is a problem, and if we can understand that sitting duration is a problem, because again, that's another thing that I've been able to pick up throughout this understanding, is that sitting is a problem, or can be a problem, but it's not only the posture of sitting, because a lot of people, they use the sort of the ergonomic desk assessment type solution as a way of trying to manage how they sit, whereas that's not necessarily an effective way to do things, because posture can be a problem, but also duration of sitting can be a problem. So if you do get someone with flexion intolerance and sitting is a big part of the trigger, then obviously you need to be able to manage the posture of your spine, but you may also understand that there's a durational aspect to it as well. So how long is someone sitting? And by breaking up how long someone sits, you can start to wind down and reduce that pain, because that's another aspect of the method that's advantageous, is that he talks about winding down pain. It's not just an overnight fix. There is a winding down process, which can take a period of days, it can take a period of weeks, depending on the type of pain. So we have to understand from that perspective. So there's a lot to understand, but that's what the Mcgill Method has certainly given me, is really digging deep into very specific triggers. Okay, is it the sitting? Is it the posture of the sitting? Is it the duration of the sitting? But let's get back to the practical everyday stuff. So if we understand that sitting is a problem, okay, we need to understand, is it posture? Is it duration? Is it both? If we can do that, so let's just say it's posture. Duration has no effect on it. It is just purely posture. Then it is just a case of changing your posture. Now, again, that doesn't mean sitting bolt upright. It does mean changing posture. It does mean moving out of that sort of, I don't know, that ergonomic way of sitting, and being a little bit more real life with it, and being able to move around in the seat. If it's a duration thing, then again, changing posture will be a part of it, but can we get up out of the seat? Can we do some exercises? Can we do some stretches? Can we do some foam rolling? Can we walk in between sitting? And again, this doesn't have to be a lot. It could be a minute, 2 minutes, up to 5 minutes. Again, people are working. It's not practical to sit for 15 minutes and then work out for half an hour, and doing that every sort of 45 minutes. It's just not practical. So it's being able to get that balance between the practicalities of life and the method of overcoming lower back pain. Now, I'm starting now possibly to blur some lines between the Mcgill Method and just my experience of working with people with lower back pain and applying the method to a person's everyday specific sort of parts of life. But the method has informed what I do, if that makes sense. So maybe I have my own method and the Mcgill Method just works within that. Maybe that's, but again, even what would be my method, which I haven't coined, would be informed by the Mcgill Method. So it would, in a sense, stand on its shoulders, if you will. So practical everyday ways to reduce pain is managing how one sits, managing how one lifts, managing how one walks, managing postures people use, managing movements people use. Now, this isn't making people into robots. This is about being able to use these sort of effective, or the method in this effective way, and build it into someone's life without the Mcgill Methods becoming someone's life, if that makes sense. It's just using it as a part of their life. So number 2 is it uses these very practical everyday solutions or ways of being able to reduce pain, which then winds down the pain, which then allows us to come on to sort of part number 3, which is using exercise in its proper context. And as I've mentioned before, exercise, or most people when it comes to lower back pain, they use exercise as the solution, or stretches as the solution. So you'll see a lot of people saying, create mobile hips and it will get rid of your lower back pain. There is some truth in that, but if someone's trigger is sitting, and you create, now they may well have stiff hips. That is completely plausible. And if you mobilize the hip, that could reduce their lower back pain for the very simple reason you're mobilizing the hip. That's absolutely fine. But if you're not managing the sitting, if you're not helping educate the individual about sitting and about the trigger of sitting, then you're always going to be fighting a losing battle, because back pain's always going to come back no matter how mobile or stiff one's hips are, because it's not the mobility of the hips that's the problem, it's the sitting that's the problem. So you need to address the full problem, if that makes sense. So when it comes to exercise, it's being able to put it into a proper context and using exercise in the way, and stretches for that matter, in the way that it's meant to be used. And how we would go about using exercise would be, as pain is reduced, using the everyday sort of ways, and exercises and stretches can certainly contribute to that. I'm not denying that, but it is just one part of a bigger picture, if you will. So it's very much using exercise to rebuild the necessary core endurance, the necessary core stability, the necessary core strength to be able to help someone overcome their lower back pain. Now, again, if sitting is the problem and you get people doing lots of planks, lots of side planks, lots of bird dogs, lots of bridges, whatever it may be, if you get them doing those and not address the sitting, then you're going to have a really strong core, but you're not going to be addressing the problem of the sitting that's causing or triggering the problem. So we need to understand that first, and that's, in some respects, that's the context of exercise. It can do a job, but it won't necessarily reduce the pain. That's what we have to understand. And by being able to develop that core endurance, that's going to help us as a more minimization of risk for the future, and building in place a proper core, a proper support system for the spine. That's going to help later on down the line, but as an initial reduction of pain, it's not necessarily going to be doing what it needs to be, or what the individual needs it to be doing. So we need to understand, we need to reduce the pain using the everyday postures, positions, movements, loads, and managing them. Once we can do that, we can then start building exercise in to then become the solution of, in some respects, not allowing lower back pain to come, or minimizing the risk of lower back pain coming back is a better way of describing it. So it's understanding it in that way. So there are advantages to exercise, but it's not the solution. You have to use it within a context to be able to get the most from it. And it's exactly the same with stretches. Again, people think a mobile spine is a pain-free spine, but people with a stiff spine, it can be painful and it can be pain-free. People with a mobile spine, it can be painful and it can be pain-free. So having a mobile spine isn't the solution to it, because there are plenty of people with mobile spines that have back pain. So we have to understand it in that way and use exercise and stretches in their proper context. Thank you for watching. Hopefully this has been helpful for you. Hopefully it's given you a better understanding of the Mcgill Method. Hopefully it's given you a better understanding of how I work and how I understand the information. So if you've enjoyed the content, hit the like button. If you've learned something new, hit the thanks button. If you want to watch more content like this, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon. And if you have a comment or a question, please do leave it below in the comment section. I'll do my best to get back to you.